gorgeous.
It's way up there. I could collect some.
It was probably Roundup Overspray.
Good morning, welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. My name is Heather. So this is our 11th garden tour of the 2024 season, and I'm so excited about the way that the pumpkin patch is shaping up.
These are Dutch fork pie pumpkins. I believe there's 15 plants here, 14 or 15. They have filled out this row really well. I've been coming through and moving some of their vines this way because this is the way that I'd like them to grow. As you can see, they are doing so. They've come out into the grass, and the theory is as they grow out into the grass, their big large leaves will help shade the grass out here. I know some of the grass is going to come up through, but I think the pumpkins are going to have an advantage, and this is going to be really cool.
Oh, I see a flower.
These plants are so big, I've been wondering where the flowers are, and that one happens to be a female. Can you see at the base of the flower, there's a little, basically immature fruit. That's a female flower. You can see the inside there.
Normally, male flowers open first. And I don't know if I see any.
Because if we see one, we're gonna play matchmaker. This little volunteer squash here, that is not a Dutch fork pie pumpkin, has a flower on it. It is a male flower. I kind of broke the stem there, but can you see how there's really nothing but stem at the base of that flower? The inside looks a little bit different too.
Squash can cross-pollinate, and it's sometimes a problem. There is a condition, I don't know if it's technically a condition, I've heard it called toxic squash syndrome, and it's when you actually get a toxic combination of two different squash, and it's obviously not good to eat. Knowing that this is not a Dutch fork pie pumpkin, I'm still going to pollinate that Dutch fork pie pumpkin with the pollen that's inside this flower. What we'll get from this combination is still a Dutch fork pie pumpkin, because that's what the mother plant is. So the squash itself is going to still be a Dutch fork pie pumpkin. The seed inside of it is going to have genetics of two different squash and could potentially be toxic. So I will plan to not save seeds. I guess we could and just see what happens, because it also could not be toxic. See, I've peeled off the parts of the flower that are going to get in the way, so we just have the pollen here. Pollen, got my squash. There, see how there's no pollen really left on that? Our job is done. Most of the time bees take care of that with no problem, but when there's only just a few blossoms open, sometimes it's not enough to draw in the pollinators. So I like to help out when I can.
The sunflowers that I planted amongst the pumpkins are still seeing the light of day. I think that they're not going to get buried, at least for now. They look really big and really good. The lovely Malabar spinach has come all the way around the trellis on both sides, and we now have a completed arch of foliage.
Absolutely gorgeous. I wanted to put this here right on the entrance on the north wall, because even if and when the tomatoes succumb to heat and disease this year, these guys should still be here and still looking beautiful.
I have not harvested a lot of leaves, but I've got plans for that. My goal was to not stress it out too much before it could make that complete arch, and we're there. I talked about this on a recent vlog, but you're going to see, looks like little pock marks on a lot of the leaves in the greenhouse. I believe this is flea beetle damage, and I have already treated.
I came through and sprayed with a product called Spinosad. It works for the flea beetles as well as a few other beetles, and it works for things like tomato worms, which is what we were experiencing on our tomatillos.
So you've got this one on the ground here.
I think it was in the last garden tour I was trying to show you guys. Okay, this one's gonna have one in it. And this tomatillo developed before I sprayed. So this is what I see. I either see a little worm inside the tomatillo with this hollowness and very few or very small seeds, or the larva has already developed into this little moth that I guess, dies inside the tomatillo. I do not understand how the life cycle of this critter works out, but this is what I've been seeing. Thankfully, I'm happy to report that most of the time now our tomatillos are coming off without any worms inside them. So I guess maybe it was a short stint that some kind of moth parent to that worm laid her eggs on my tomatillo, and she has since moved on. But I needed to spray for the flea beetles anyway, so it worked out. And we are very close to tomato hornworm season. My sister-in-law, who lives just an hour south of us, she has seen some pretty big ones. I haven't yet, but maybe we'll find one today. Another pest that I've seen quite a lot of, not anything super intense, but you know, intense enough where it doesn't make me happy, is aphids. And I have done a lot of spraying the leaves with water to try and combat that. Because of that, I am seeing certain measures of disease on my tomato leaves. I do not think that the tomatoes are going to last as long this season as they have in past seasons. Also too, this is my first time really trying to grow a lot of heirlooms inside the greenhouse here. You can't hear them now because I shut them off for the garden tour, but I do have flow fans that provide a lot of airflow, but I haven't pruned these super heavily. There's a myriad of reasons why the heirlooms might not be doing so well. In the past, I have grown hybrid tomatoes that were designed for greenhouse growing in here, and they did really well. I think the heirlooms are doing pretty well though. This one is called Alice's Dream. Gorgeous. I'm noticing a couple plants that are just not getting much bigger than, you know, about 3 feet high. I have a theory on this. This plant is Berkeley's tie-dye, and see, it's only about 2.5 feet tall, while the tomato next to it is like twice as big. Do you see that? Big one, small one. A major issue that we have on our farm, and it's particularly bad this year, is rodents. And I have noticed, at least earlier in the year, we had quite a few rodents tunneling inside the soil in these beds. And so rodents and ants can be problems in the garden when they tunnel either under or amongst the roots of the plant. Roots are not going to grow into air, and so the tunneling that happens by those critters can really stunt a plant because the plant really can't expand its root system to collect up nutrition and water. And that is what I'm guessing is going on here. We've got a few plants that are really just not getting bigger, and I have noticed rodent holes basically at the base of those plants, so I'm just putting 2 and 2 together. I don't think it's something that I can fix right now with the plants in the soil. I'll have to worry about that later. We do have at least some fruit though. This small plant and this big plant, they are the same variety. You can see this big tomato here. This is a cat-faced tomato. This is several tomatoes growing fused together. So we saw this one. This is what it's supposed to look like. This is a single blossom. And this tomato resulted from a fasciated or a fused blossom. You can almost see 2 different fruits fused together there. I think one of the bigger tomatoes that we have growing right now is over here. It's on this plant, the Ponderosa Pink. That's a big one. I've grown bigger, but I'm happy with that. This particular Ponderosa Pink plant has quite a few fruit on it. And next door we have a Roma tomato. I noticed we have a blushing fruit over here. All right, let me show you something. That is a bummer. These 2 fruits have blossom end rot, which is sad. I'm just going to throw them down into the bed right there. Blossom end rot is caused by a failure to mobilize calcium into the fruits or into the plant. This same plant has quite a few fruits that do not have blossom end rot, but let's see about this one down here. I see a very red tomato. Same plant, this one's perfect. So I have theorized that my irregular or excessive watering has caused this problem. Because like I said, it's not necessarily an indicator that the soil doesn't have available calcium. It's just that the plant isn't able to take it up. And excess water is one reason for that. I feel like if the calcium wasn't available in the soil and the plant wasn't able to take it up ever, all of the fruits on the plant would be affected, and it's spotty. So it's like while the fruits were developing in some critical stage where the calcium was important, it wasn't able to get it at this point. And so this one has a blossom end rot, but there's plenty without it.
And that's just a theory. I don't really know. I'm just guessing. I don't have my harvest basket this morning. You probably saw this pink flush in the background. Here's another indicator that I might be overwatering.
But that's okay. We will pick this one today and it's going to be lovely. This is the pink oxheart tomato. Last week, I was like, man, I don't know when these fruits are going to flush. And now we've got a couple that we're actually able to harvest today. This is my first time growing this variety.
I noticed this one has a crack too. I am gonna take that one. A lot of heirloom tomatoes are going to ripen in this way, or a lot of tomatoes really are going to ripen in this way. They start out flushing at the bottom with their color, and the coloring moves up along to the shoulders, and the shoulders are the last thing to turn color.
Sometimes with heirloom tomatoes, the top pretty much always stays green, or before the top turns the color of the rest of the tomato, the bottom of the tomato may start to get ultra soft. This is a thing with a lot of heirlooms, and it's usually not a problem. Most of the time the top is ripened enough where it doesn't cause really a change of flavor. The inside of the fruit is normally nice and red, as it should be.
Or I guess pink in this case. I picked a couple yellow currant tomatoes. As you can see, we've got some disease, potentially some deficiency over here. This looks like a nutrient deficiency to me right here.
I don't know that I'm going to do anything about it at this exact moment, but I'm aware of it.
I have another Berkeley's tie-dyed tomato, which is also big and lush over here, and it also has some beautiful big striped tomatoes. I'm really excited about these.
So down here on this end of the greenhouse, I have our cherry tomatoes and some eggplant and a couple other things. I have some concerns about this side of the greenhouse, and I have some theories that I'm not sure are facts, but I've seen this every year that we've gardened here, and I've associated it with something, and I want to tell you about it.
So we have our green stock here. This is a first year planting space, so the soil really does need some work, but it's been growing food pretty well. As you can see, we've gotten quite a few tomatoes. The celery could use a bigger pot, I am told, but it's been doing okay. But you see the leaf on this bean plant here. I just put these seeds in here a few weeks ago. The plants are pretty big. Their first leaves started out fine and normal, and as the plant has grown, we suddenly had this happen. Look at this. This is particularly bad. This is not good. As you can see, this tomato is fine. The celery is fine. The beans are not fine. Look at how shriveled that leaf is. This is bad. See this?
So we live in the dead center of agricultural farmland. All around us are big monocrops of things like corn and soy and wheat and tobacco. And last week, it was actually a week ago yesterday, we saw a sprayer pull in across the street for the field across the street. I've been waiting for it because they hadn't planted yet, and they started to spray. Now it's somewhat okay. I mean, they do what they have to do. I understand. I don't love it, but when I see them pull in, if I see them pull in, what I do is I start the sprinklers, the overhead sprinklers for my raised bed garden, and we'll go check out the raised bed garden in a little bit. And the theory is if any of the Roundup is going to waft or drift through the air, that the spraying is going to be able to knock it out of the air. And that works really well, actually. You'll see that my raised bed garden is fine. I've got beans over there. They're fine. This is my first year growing in the greenhouse with the fans, and I think the fans or the open door here may have just allowed some of that drift to get inside the greenhouse, because in years past, the greenhouse hasn't been affected by the Roundup drift, but I think it has been affected this year.
What is amazing about these plants is that they will recover pretty well. So in the following weeks, we'll be able to determine if this is Roundup overspray based on how the plant reacts. So if we start seeing new growth that looks good like this, it was probably Roundup overspray. I do have curling tomatoes in the greenhouse, and I had this anyway because we do have tomato curly top virus on some of the plants in here. And so I'm not entirely sure that this isn't the tomato curly top virus, but it does look an awful lot like Roundup Overspray. And these guys are probably going to be okay. Just like I mentioned, usually it's only the leaves that get the overspray on them that are affected, and then the new growth winds up okay. But see how horribly curled that is? I believe that that is a problem. This does look like overspray damage right here. That's excessive curling. This is what curling looks like with the tomato curly top virus right here. See, they're kind of small and puny, but they're not like completely like a scroll curled up. These guys are very twisted. So we'll see.
So am I comfortable eating from these plants now that I pretty much know that they have experienced some overspray? The answer is yes. This happens every year. If I was to be super fearful of that, I would never get to grow a garden and get to enjoy it. And I don't want that situation to have that power in my life. It's obviously not ideal. I don't love it, but I'm not going to let it ruin my gardening experience more than it has to.
So it'll be interesting to see these guys next week and in the following weeks. The cherry tomatoes are putting on a lot of flowers. We are seeing fruit. I'm highly anticipating the Super Sweet 100. No, it's been a few years since I've gotten to eat those. This Super Sweet 100 on the end here looks good. I don't really understand it, but I guess it didn't get very much of the drift.
I don't really have an explanation as to why the pumpkin plants look good and why other plants really are less affected. It's mostly just my beans that I'm seeing the problem in, and those tomatoes at the end.
Over here on the lane, these guys were not protected from the potential for overspray, and these armpit melons did really well. They've gotten a lot bigger since last week, and it won't be long before they are attached to the trellis. So I do have beans out here. These are chicken and dumplings cowpeas. I'm seeing the slightest bit of damage from herbicide drift on them. It's not a lot. You can see we had some here. It's not a lot, but it does exist. See there? It's kind of puckered and shriveled in. Overall though, the cowpeas look really good, so I think it's gonna be okay.
Like I said, it's usually okay. They were not directly sprayed. It just comes in like as a mist on the air. It's gross.
Love you.
Love you, baby.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have fun.
I am having fun.
Good.
We're supposed to have another heat wave today. It's gonna be 109. It's not gonna be fun.
Here's the kids' garden. It doesn't appear that the kids' garden was affected too badly by the drift. We do have a little bit of it on this tomato here. It seems like tomatoes and beans are affected the most. My daughter does have some tomatoes set, and hers look good. I don't notice any blossom end rot over here.
This orange cherry tomato, I told you that I thought that the fruits were starting to ripen, and they were. And my son is he's picking them off a little bit underripe. He's excited. This is really all of their first official garden that is exclusively theirs. And so they've been really excited to eat fruit out of it. It's just about that time where they should be waking up and coming out to check their gardens and get their pre-breakfast snack.
I don't see that he has any semi-ripe tomatoes this morning, so he's gonna have to settle for a cucumber or a pepper. These guys look okay. A lot of times peppers are affected by herbicide drift as well.
And that's the thing about herbicide drift, because it's not directly sprayed, there's not this even coating that drifts along the air. It can be kind of sporadic, so I'm grateful that it didn't affect their garden too badly. So the lovely raised bed garden is doing really well. The sprinklers that we ran for when the sprayers were out did their job, and I don't see any signs of herbicide drift over here. I do have some tomatoes and things that we'll look at, but I can't pass by this loofah without showing it to you. First thing, it's way up there. Way up there. So we've reached the peak of the archway with the loofah already.
I wanted to show you. See this? A lot like the baby squash, the loofah will create essentially a small version of the finished fruit at the base of the female flower. So we have the female flower here and a little baby loofah. So once this opens and gets pollinated, it'll grow real big. And then this is like a male flower cluster right next to it.
So far nothing open yet. Those are yellow flowers too, but it's not going to be very long, and this is happening a lot faster than it happened for me last year. I've had a couple concerned comments of people that have seen how fast this has grown, and they've been nervous that they're not going to be able to get harvestable loofah at the end of the season. I will say that I had no technically harvestable loofah at the end of last season because they were all green. You can process green loofah, and it's actually easier, in my opinion, than processing a fully cured loofah that's turned brown and crispy on the plant. Actually, we're gonna pop into my shed really quick so I can show you. This is my loofah collection from last year, and a lot of the ones that you see that are white and clean, these were harvested from green loofah. See how beautiful it is? It's gorgeous. Now the loofah is a little bit thin in some spots, but it's totally usable. What I was going to do, and what I have done a few times, is to fold these over like this and sew along the edge. Probably cut this one, it's a little big, but basically make a square sponge out of the loofah. Some more immature ones end up a little bit thin like this, but then there's others that are just nice and thick and white without me having to do anything like sun bleaching them or chemically bleaching them. So that's pretty awesome. I do have this one on the end. I had a couple loofah that I left on the plant, and then we got our final freeze or two, and some of the loofah did actually turn a little bit brown and crispy, and this is the loofah that I was able to get off of that. So you can see it is a little bit dingy looking, and you can take care of this. This washes out. People do sun bleach or regular bleach these. I think maybe people use lemon juice in the sun when they don't want to use chemical bleach. But I just wanted to show you that it's totally possible to get a good product that lasts from a green loofah. And I do have a video on that. I'll link that at the end of this garden tour. You also can eat immature loofah. I really probably wouldn't eat it if it was longer than about 5 or 6 inches, because at that point it starts to get pretty fibrous and not that appetizing. But I've eaten them, and they're a lot like a cucumber in flavor. Tiny bit of mucilage like you would get with eating okra, and they have a little bit of a spongy texture. It's actually pretty good.
And notice we've got another very tiny set of blossoms coming in there. So I have not thought about seriously what I'm going to plant in this space. You can see all the bolted lettuce that we have here.
We've got to get down here so I can show you what I wanted to show you today. So the lettuce, when it goes to seed, it gets these little flowers on them that look like little yellow daisies. And then when those are pollinated, they turn into almost like these little dandelion puffs.
And just like with dandelions, the seed of the lettuce is at the base of that little puff.
So if we kind of pinch at the puff here, can you see the little seeds? It almost looks like little hair roots on the puff. That is lettuce seed. Isn't that awesome? This particular one has white seed. There, and I just plucked these out of the plant that's behind me. These are brown seeds, and that's how you harvest lettuce seed. Pretty cool. So I've got to do that over here.
I'm not too worried about this side of the bed because that is owned by the loofah, and eventually the loofah is going to climb down over here. And this bed is particularly shaded. Let's go over there and look at it. In the mornings it's going to be shaded by the loofah, and in the afternoons it's going to be shaded by the blackberries. So I'm not really sure what to put here this year.
Honestly, I think I probably put the loofah on the wrong side of the trellis. I should have stuck it on this side so that the morning sun could at least be gotten by that bed over there next year.
I may throw some beans in here. I don't know. We'll see. Something that doesn't need a lot of sun. My husband and I just came out yesterday to harvest blackberries. We got about 1/2 gallons worth of blackberries, and there's already so many more on these plants.
I do have to come through and prune. I have to do that a few times throughout the season because blackberry can be a little bit of a bully in the garden, and I really want to contain it just to this side of the raised bed.
It might be kind of hard to tell, but this is actually a U-shaped raised bed. So there's an arm here and an arm here, and it comes around. And I have this trellis here that used to have cucamelons on it for a couple of years. I half expected to see some of those volunteer, but I don't see them. I do see a volunteer tomato down here and a tree. We'll take that out. Ugh. But yeah, the hope is to have the blackberries just sort of amble that way and not really bully into their way on this side of the garden. So I've got to come through and snip off some of the canes that are getting a little bit wild. What they'll do is they'll actually root really anywhere along the stem. So this cane here arching over into this side of the bed, if it's in contact with the soil long enough, it will put roots on the end, and we would have, you know, the berries really infiltrating on the other side, and I don't want that. Down here I had some kale plants that I was leaving in, hoping that they would go to seed so that I could collect the seed. This is a curly leaf kale. We've had quite a lot of bug damage since I decided I was going to do that, and I don't think that these plants are going to live long enough in order to flower. So these will probably get pulled out before the next garden tour. I still have these beds bare here. We will take a minute just to gaze at the lovely zinnia.
I had asked in the last garden tour what you guys thought about me putting some like bush cherry trees over here, the Nanking cherries, whether they should go in the middle of the bed or on the end here. And quite a few people said, Heather, they get pretty big. They might cast a lot of shade. Why don't you think about putting them somewhere else? So I did.
Now this is just temporary, but I have these 15-gallon grow bags that I bought from Epic Gardening, and this is their temporary home until I figure it out. I really wanted to get them out of their nursery pots and let them stretch out their roots and get some growth going. Now you'll see I've got a little bit of crispiness on some of these leaves. Actually, every single leaf that the plants came to me with did get, you know, shocked by the amount of sun that we have here. Even though I did try to carefully introduce the plant into the sun, it didn't really like it. You can see that happening here, but the plants are putting on new foliage. All of this lovely green stuff is brand new since it came here.
So they'll bounce back. It'll be fine. Eventually, when we get this area cleaned up, I think they're gonna go back here more on the north side so that they won't cast shade on the garden and they'll be able to get bigger. So I haven't exactly decided what I'm doing in these beds, but I think that I would like to plant a few more melons than I have.
My husband and I were at the farm store yesterday and I saw this mushroom compost and I figured, why not try it? This was only $5, which I thought was pretty good. Yesterday when I took it out of the car, it felt pretty hot, but I think it was just because it was in the car and in the parking lot at the farm store, because it doesn't feel hot. So I don't think that this is still, you know, composting down. Wow. That looks really good. Look at that.
So I think probably by next week I will have planted a few more things out here. Some melons, potentially some more squash, like summer squash. Speaking of squash, we're gonna be a little bit sporadic on today's tour.
If you've been following the garden tours, you know that I have this volunteer tromboncino squash in our compost bin. It's not looking good, you guys. It suddenly started wilting right after the garden tour last week, and this is probably not going to come back from it, so I need to come out and harvest these fruits before they start to rot.
I don't think it was the herbicide drift. Like, it just occurred to me that the herbicide drift may have affected this squash. I guess that's possible at this point. It doesn't really look like it. Usually with herbicide drift, the plants like shrivel, they like shrink up and the leaves get kind of thick and leathery. This just more wilted and succumbed, but maybe that's how this particular plant reacted. I don't know.
We also have quite a bit of morning glory in this bed. We always have. It's not really a bed. Oh look, a flower. It's called bindweed in some circles because this is what it does. It wraps around the plant and in theory could choke it out from its nutrition. I don't know that that's not what happened down there, but I do know that up here it doesn't really look like that that's what's happening. Like, it's not tight enough around that stem to really choke off the water.
We have quite a lot of bindweed over here and in the compost, and I don't really worry about it. I kind of like the look of it, and I know that freaks some people out. They're like, Heather, get rid of that. But when I do move our compost into beds where I would like to use it, I do pull out the little baby plants, and it hasn't taken over in the garden really anywhere else. It just kind of takes over right here.
And obviously all of this is bonus fruit, so it's really not a big deal if it succumbs anyway, but that looks good. So maybe there is hope for our tromboncino. We've got some flowers there too.
As far as I knew, it was just one tromboncino plant in here, but there may be more than one. And also, when squash ambles along the ground, it will set down roots wherever it touches the ground. So if something happens to one segment of the plant, oftentimes other segments are able to live because they have a separate root system. So fingers crossed.
I noticed that our elderberry plant already has some ripe berries. So this particular head of berries isn't totally ripe. You can see some of the green ones in there, but it's very close. The berries get purple and juicy and heavy, and the whole head just bows down. Ooh, there's some bugs on that one. Yuck. So far, I'm just leaving them.
I could collect some. I can't say that I won't and, you know, throw them in the freeze dryer or something, but I made a lot of elderberry syrup last year that we really didn't use a lot of. We just didn't need it, which I'm not going to complain about that. And so these are here just because this is what plants do. They produce every single year, and I don't necessarily need everything every single year from the perennial garden. So I may harvest some, I may leave it. I still haven't decided.
But see how much fruit is on here? I collected so many of the blossoms to make elderflower cordial, and they kept producing blossoms and produced tons of berries. I thought that I wasn't going to be getting a lot of berries this year because of taking so many blossoms, but I was wrong.
This is actually two plants. There's the big one back there with all the berries, and then there's a smaller one on this side, which is always a little bit behind the other plant. They are the same variety.
But this one has this gorgeous big head of blossoms.
Easily one of my favorite smells. It's very reminiscent of lilac, if you're familiar with that.
So I guess we'll view the rest of the raised bed garden coming in from the back. Looks like we are here in a good time to see the bees on the bee balm. They've been loving it, as they do. The asparagus is just as wild and crazy as I hope for every year. It's doing a good job collecting the sun and getting that energy down into the crown. Some of the asparagus have kind of flopped over in some of the winds that we've had, but that's okay. They'll be fine. It's kind of providing some shade to the strawberries down here, which we have started to harvest more of. See there? Some of them are quite big, a lot of them are kind of small, but that does happen throughout the season. You get some big juicy ones in the beginning of the season, and then they sort of get smaller as the heat sets in.
Those are ever-bearing strawberries. So a June-bearing variety would have put on all of its fruit at once. These ever-bearing varieties put on fruit throughout the season. It just does kind of wane as the heat sets in.
I haven't talked about the blueberry bed in a while. We set this up earlier in the year, and the blueberries have established really well. No, sir. I had a tiny handful of blueberries on this plant, but we weren't able to harvest them. Something came and got them. So the hope is eventually with this bed that we're able to put like a cage over it to protect it from birds. I put this gorgeous alyssum ground cover in here to act as a living mulch. I haven't actually mulched this bed with anything except for the alyssum, and I haven't cut it back.
I did read that you could cut back alyssum to encourage more blooming, and I did that on some of the alyssum that I have in the greenhouse, and I don't know if maybe I was too heavy-handed with it, but it did not recover well. So I'm really glad that I did not do that out here.
What the alyssum has done is just to get, taller, to produce more blooms up the stalk, and it creates these little tiny seed pods further down the plant, and the little tiny orange alyssum seed is in there, and they drop down, and we should have alyssum here forever.
And hopefully all over the garden for forever. It is a really nice ground cover. The thing about alyssum is that its root system doesn't really invade or compete with the plant that it's planted next to, so it's a really great symbiotic relationship.
And it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Our grapes are really starting to fill out their trellis. So they looked kind of silly for a lot of the season because it was just this one little baby stick with a few leaves growing up the middle. But now that we have encouraged it to grow laterally, it is doing so with vigor. So it's getting inches of growth every single week. This one too, these are the Carlos Muscadine grapes. I mentioned before, I don't think we're going to be getting grapes this year, but next year we should. I have this volunteer yellow wax bean that loves to come back on our farm.
This is actually the first one that I've gotten to eat. That's the true taste of summer, a nice squeaky bean.
My dill that got a little bit windswept last week didn't really recover as far as standing back up straight. It sort of just stayed over, laid over like this. but that's okay. I have been waiting and waiting very eagerly and with much anticipation for some swallowtail butterfly caterpillars to take up residence in here, and I have not seen them yet. I will encourage that. Really what I want to establish here is just I want the dill to come back every year, so I wanted it to set its flowers and then its seed, which it's done.
Every time I do this, where I will like kind of encourage the volunteering of the plants, I think of you military people, and prior military will know it, voluntold. This reminds me of that. I'll be so excited about the volunteer dill that we get in this bed that I encourage to grow there.
So yeah, that's all I'm really after. It's just a continual supply of dill. And I think that the swallowtail butterflies and I can share. I haven't seen them yet though. Down here in the walking onion bed, they have kind of been dying back on their leaves. This is my first year growing them, so I'm not sure if this is like other onions, that this means that they are starting to mature the bulbs underneath the ground, but maybe. I see a volunteer tomato in here. I am going to pull this. It does look like we are getting a couple more bulbs from our walking onions that they will set down in the bed and encourage more onions. I love it. So let's talk about this side of the garden now. The field that was sprayed is right there. We came out as soon as we heard the sprayer, turned it on, and I do not see herbicide drift damage over here. Actually, these plants are looking greener than they did. They were looking pretty dead for a while, so I guess maybe they appreciated the extra water that they got that day. These are the tiny Tim tomatoes. Can you see this spider here? I'm trying not to disturb it. But we've gotten a lot of fruit, and we're continuing to get a lot of fruit. What I'm doing with these tomatoes is actually slicing them in half, putting them cut side up on a dehydrator tray, put a little bit of salt and stick them in the dehydrator. And that is my favorite way to preserve cherry tomatoes. And when we get a lot of cherry tomatoes coming out of the greenhouse, I'll do a video on that. They are so good dry or even rehydrated. Dehydrating them down really concentrates their flavor. And when you go to rehydrate them to put them in like a dish or something, they don't ever fully get back to being like a fresh tomato, but that's okay because they're able to retain kind of that caramelized, lovely umami tomato flavor. So I'm excited about these. These dehydrate down really well and taste amazing. They taste better when they're dehydrated down because of that concentrated sugar. These plants really did get a lot of disease on them because earlier in the spring we had a lot of rain, but truthfully they've actually kind of bounced back better than I really thought that they would. I just figured the plants were going to be goners, but I've just been coming through and picking off the diseased leaves when I see them, and it hasn't really done anything bad to them. They've been producing like crazy. See, even this one has more blossoms, so we're gonna get more fruit. This is good. Over here I have Kalima bush beans, and I thought that these beans were basically done. Usually bush beans will produce for a few weeks and then kind of peter out, and I thought we were in the petering out stage, but then they put on all this new foliage and all these new blossoms. So I'm gonna leave them in. My first time growing this variety of beans was last year. I grew them in my greenhouse towards the end of the season, so I didn't really get the chance to see how they produce throughout a longer season because, you know, the frost came through and killed them out at one point. But it looks like they may be putting on another succession, like a sizable succession of beans. So rather than start some more seeds, I think I'm just gonna leave these and see how they do for a second round. I harvested the beans on a vlog recently and I really didn't get very many. So I haven't been coming through here to collect them. I've just sort of been waiting for this second flush. The sunflowers on the cap of this bed are a lot taller than I thought they'd be. I planted these from seed that I saved in 2021, and they were smaller seed, and I had remembered them coming from a sunflower that wasn't particularly tall, that was more of an amber color sunflower, more like reddish orange or red in color. And I don't think that they were this tall, but they may have cross-pollinated with like a mammoth sunflower, which I did have out here at the same time. I'm not really sure, so we get to see what happens together. I keep saying, oh, they're getting so close to blooming. The little buds in the middle have been looking the same. They just keep growing upwards. So eventually we will have some beautiful sunflowers here. The wind did knock one over, but I left this in here. I came to pull it out and I wanted to show you. This stem is completely cracked and bent, but if you follow it along, it is actually attached to this. See that? So it's bent and broken, but she's not dead yet, so I'm gonna leave it.
That south wind is starting to blow, so it's bringing that heat in for today. So I'm gonna go inside. Here is the video of processing green loofah if you're interested in that, and I'll see you guys again soon.